Good morning, everybody. I'm Bob Grace from Sustainable Energy Advantage. I'm co-chair of the conference today. You'll be seeing me up here every once in a while. We're going to try to get started on time and keep on time because, as you've probably noticed, we have a very full schedule. We're trying to accomplish a lot today, and we appreciate your help in trying to get through it all. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in and introduce Michele DesAutels from Department of Energy, who's going to give us a little background on the big picture. Welcome, Michele.
Good morning. Michele DesAutels from the Department of Energy Wind Program. I've been with the Wind Program for about 2 years now. I started 2 years ago after I graduated from University of Massachusetts Amherst with a dual degree of business and public policy. So I'm more of a policy business person in an organization that's primarily R&D. And why I'm here to talk about as Bob said, the big picture, the high level of where the wind program fits within the administration and other priorities. And I'm also here to explain how the Department of Energy is addressing responsible deployment of wind from their perspective. If you haven't read the administration's recent blueprint for a secure energy future, it talks about various goals related to clean energy, and those are about increasing the number of increasing sources by 2035, trying to reduce carbon emissions, as well as trying to, of course, stimulate jobs. And from those high-level goals, the Department of Energy Secretary Chu has recently announced his strategic plan, and within that, it follows very similarly to promote energy security and through various sources, and wind is just one of them. And of course, being an R&D organization, it's about innovation, competitiveness. Within Department of Energy, the wind program falls under an organization called EERE, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Within this organization, we are the organization is looking at improving the cost of energy, or lowering the cost of energy, improving the performance of the technology, and also removing barriers to the various technologies. So the wind and water program, which is where we fall under, is focused on those areas. Our strategy to accomplish the goals set out by the administration as well as the secretary is to focus on three main areas. One is the cost of energy, and that is looking at the technology, the hardware, and how we can improve things so much that we see great reductions. Oh, I just looked at the slides. The slides are kind of, they can't read the slides. Oh, well, okay. Okay, because I just realized you can't see the things on the side. Okay, all right. And within there's some improvements. We're doing a lot of quality assurance, quality control. And then the second area is around siting and permitting. I sit in the team called Technology Acceptance. And under Technology Acceptance, we focus on three main areas. Radar interference. We have a team member who works very closely with DoD and other agencies to understand what are the technical issues related to radar and where wind turbines are and where they play with wind turbines. We have another individual who's working on environmental and wildlife, so working very closely with Fish and Wildlife and various NGOs to understand what the concerns are, conducting research, and then producing reports and disseminating those. And then my area of responsibility is around public perception. So I primarily work on stakeholder engagement issues, working with the various people at the federal, state, and local level to provide information on a number of different areas. And then we have a team focusing on transmission. There are a lot of integration issues. There are a lot of planning issues that our office works with the Office of Electricity within the Department of Energy, who then works with FERC and other federal agencies, as well as the planning organizations. You may have heard, and again, this is outlined in the Blueprint for a Secure Energy Future, that Department of Energy has now taken another step towards implementing an offshore wind strategy. And I'm actually going to be trying to be in 2 places today at one time. I got to drive down to New Bedford after this because the Bureau of Energy Management is going to be hosting with the Massachusetts state folks to have a task force meeting. And this is about trying to get the first offshore wind responsibly across the U.S., and Massachusetts is one of the states that's been working towards that. 2 of the main objectives for the strategy are about, again, reducing cost of energy, as well as reducing the timeline, because as we know with existing projects that are trying to get in place, the permitting timeline is very long. And we don't know exactly how long it's going to be, so we're trying to figure out, baseline it, and reduce those. So one of the ways that we are measured for our progress is around deployment of wind. So there's other technology measures that Office of Management Budget measures us on based on what Congress has appropriated. And as you can see from the top left map, in 1999, there was only one state that and the 2 measures are over 100 megawatts of wind and over 1,000 megawatts of wind. And in 1999, we had 1 state with 1,000, 5 states of 100. And this last year, we had 14 states over 1,000 megawatts, primarily in the Midwest, and then approximately 30 states over 100. We had 2 new states come online with wind. And we're not sure if DOE had a direct impact, and over the course of this next year, we're conducting a study to see how the impact of DOE is on the deployment. So this is the area that I wanted to make sure you guys are aware of. Wind Powering America, which is what I manage, is about stakeholder engagement, education, and engaging with you all to help you understand what the issues are, and then you can have an open dialogue. So we are working to support a network of such. The New England Wind Forum is one of those organizations. We are developing and disseminating through various ways. We have a website, we have fact sheets. You may have seen some of that there. We come to events, as well as we have, we work with radio, and we're trying to get into more social media. And then, of course, we're trying to understand if we're doing well. So the reason that I'm here today is that in 2005, the Department of Energy piloted, through the leadership of Larry Flowers from NREL, the New England Wind Forum. And this is trying to get local-based, regional information out to the people who need it. So if you haven't been here, here's the website, and it has information about events, news, research specifically to New England. And I think that this event here today is I'm looking at the room, you guys have almost all the seats filled. This is a great opportunity to talk to your fellow peers next to you across the room and discuss what are the issues and how you can move forward with responsible deployment of wind. As I mentioned, I apologize, I can't stay here all day today, but I am happy to talk to you if you want to call me, email me. I'll leave this up for a few seconds if you want to write it down. And I appreciate the fact that you're spending time today to talk to each other. So thank you for your time, and I hope that that information was useful.
Thank you, Michele. So our next speaker is Ian Baring-Gould from the National Renewable Energy Lab. Ian is my co-chair and the co-grantee for NEWEEP, and we're going to tag team this presentation once I have it up here. There you go. So Ian recently took over for Larry Flowers, who we started this project with and has been fantastic to work with, very engaged. While his responsibilities are national, he's put a tremendous amount of time in to our local initiative, and we really appreciate that attention. So he'll take us forward from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome, everybody. I just want to restate for Michele, we're thrilled to have as many people here as are here because it demonstrates the real importance of open dialogue about an issue that is in no way simple or easy to address. And the way we address these kind of issues, whether they are contentious or not, is through education and dialogue and understanding. And that's one of the clear roles of DOE's program, as well as the work of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and NEWEEP, to provide dialogue, provide a space for dialogue for this kind of information. And so that's what the role of this conference is, and I'm going to spend the first part of this presentation talking about the role of the conference. And then Bob is going to step in and talk more specifically about the details and what we're trying to achieve today. So the context for everybody to see and to understand is to really share the information that is presented here. We understand that it's a contentious issue, and that can bring out passions, does bring out passions in people, but without the ability to listen, without the ability to pose or have posed questions and address the issues that are facing each of us, whether we're from the industry or from a community that is being impacted by wind, we're not able to come to a conclusion, whatever that conclusion can be or will be for each specific project. So the hopes of the day is really to move closer to common ground. Everybody in this room is here because they feel passionately about this issue for one way or another. Some see it as, or could see it as, a terrible thing that's impacting communities, and the other spectrum could say that given our society, we have to embrace renewable resources or we're going to bake our planet, okay? Two very extremes, and you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't feel passionately about the issue. You would be off at work or you would be out playing in the woods, enjoying a beautiful day here in New England. Okay, if everybody here has passion about it, then we have to have strong dialogue about it, but dialogue that comes through with mutual respect. So we hope to share information. We all believe strongly, but we need to share that information. And I think another key point is that people are working on different sets of information. All you have to do is search the internet for a couple of minutes, and you can find two very different views of the same thing. And so hopefully coming together and being able to talk to each other in the panel sessions and outside allows us to get a better understanding of what the different viewpoints are. The role of NEWEEP, I think, really states what we're trying to do here and some of the problems. Objective information for which we can make informed decisions, and that's the key. Every decision is going to be different for each location, but the key is to make an informed decision based on as much real information as we have available, and then being able to understand and learn from those experiences, with the understanding that different people have different views. And so the people who are completely opposed to a project will have one view and will make a case against that view. People who are supportive of a project will have a different view and will make that view. Chances are both views are not actually accurate, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And the goal is to come and make that truth represent here. Just a little bit about the NEWEEP organization. It's quite large, and we've tried to get a very diverse group of stakeholders that are part of the steering committee that help inform events like this, as well as the webinars and other activities. All of the previous webinars and things of that nature are on the website, and so encourage folks to go and look. Just a little bit of a question about the people that are in the room. It would be nice to be able to go out and have everybody introduce themselves, but in a conference that's going to top 250 people, that's not something that we can do. So just so that we can understand who's in the room, let's do this kind of show of hands thing. How many people here are from government organizations? A very large percentage. How many people are from the general public, just citizens? How many people are from service forms or law organizations, people that work with communities in the industry in regards to energy projects? How many people would consider them in the utility service sector, with power companies, ISOs, people like that? How many educators? And how many other people? Still more, good. And then another question. So how many people here believe that wind power is not a viable solution for America, period? How many people think that wind power is the best thing since sliced bread? And how many people are in the middle? So I think that tells us what we're trying to do here. There's a lot of people in the middle, and the question is, as with every project, what makes sense and what doesn't. Two slides that I want to put up here that I think help before we turn this over to Bob. This is a question, part of the surveys that we did at the beginning, before that you all filled out, and these are kind of word searches and highlighting the words that come out most clearly when asked these questions. How should developers and public leaders engage the undecided majority, which was demonstrated in this room, about wind? And certainly dialogue, communities, meeting, information, all come out very strongly. And then finally, the biggest challenges, information. And that's what we're trying to do here today. So without further ado, I'd like to have Bob Grace come up and talk a little bit more about the discussion that we're going to go through today and that process. Bob.
Thank you, Ian. All right, so let's get down to business. Structure of the day. Today's organized into two parts. We have the conference and a workshop in one. This hopefully will give participants the opportunity to speak and not just be spoken to. The agenda today is going to cover a number of different topics. We'll start with discussing the experiences with operating wind farms in the region. Now, we've had some experience over the last few years. We'll hear about a sampling of operating projects throughout the region from places that, at least to some neighbors, wind installations that may be considered problematic to some, and others that have generally been well accepted. We'll then move on to session 3, where we'll hear from experts on some of the key issues impacting public acceptance, both environmental and human. It's not meant to be comprehensive. There's only so much we can accomplish in one day. I'm sure you'll all perceive that there are some issues that you feel strongly about that are missing. So we'll also look to identify during that session those other issues which require greater research and education. Session 4, our lunch speaker, will give us some context on the factors driving wind power. Why wind? Why is it happening? What about wind in the context of other options, other resources, and the role of sound science? After lunch, we're going to split up into parallel sessions. First, in session 5, we'll have sessions on wind energy economics. So how does wind compare to the alternatives? What's the role of subsidies? What drives developers to choose one location over another? We'll discuss how different states approach planning for wind power. We'll explore issues associated with public acceptance for offshore wind. And we'll explore the techniques currently available to mitigate wind power impacts. In session 6, we're going to do two things. We'll have one panel to explore how wind power interacts with the grid in terms of reliability, what gets displaced, things of that sort. But session 6 is primarily when we get to hear your voices, when you get to engage with each other. You're going to split up into self-selected workshops that will allow, hopefully, civil discussion of a number of different things. Building and funding a credible and objective research and education agenda. Using stakeholder networks to engage the vast undecided. Building better bylaws. And learning from experience, using planning and mitigation to find better outcomes, however you define better. Many of you completed pre-conference surveys. Thank you for doing that, by the way. We had a lot of you do that, and that was very helpful, to help us prioritize and focus those workshops on what you think is most important. Afterwards, in session 7, we'll come back together and have some note takers summarize what we've learned, what we've discussed in those workshops, and share them with each other. And finally, we'll wrap up a long and hopefully productive day, and we'll discuss where to go from there. As far as our speakers go, you're going to see their bios in the folders. In the interest of time and to get through our full agenda, we're not going to go through full introductions of everybody. I encourage you to take a look. In the spirit of seeking the middle ground and the goal of informing decision makers, I suspect that both developers and critics of wind will find some things lacking about our agenda today. I encourage you to see the agenda not for what it isn't, but for what it is. It's not perfect. We can't provide a voice to every issue in one day. We've done our best to lay the groundwork for a civil-informed exchange of information. Think of this, please, as the beginning of a more constructive dialogue and not the end. We look forward to your feedback afterwards on what's missing and what can be done better. Now, some of the mechanics of the day. Please turn these things off, or restrooms outside in the hall. Ground rules. You all saw that we asked you to agree to ground rules as a condition of signing up. You're going to see them on posters throughout the rooms today. And basically, they request a civil and respectful dialogue without getting personal, without getting attacks, without speaking over each other. You've agreed to these rules. We hope you'll play by them. Really, today is a leap of faith. A lot of meetings about wind get very testy. We're hoping today can be an opportunity that we can talk to each other without shouting, we can listen to each other without filtering for just what we want to hear, and we can focus on the issues without pointing fingers. You'll notice that we're videotaping all the plenary sessions and some of the other sessions. And we'll be trying to audio record some of the other panel sessions. The one place we're not doing that is in the workshops, where you should all feel free to speak. So please, no recording in those sessions without seeking everybody's consent. Q&A. There are a lot of people here, as you've noticed, and in an effort to get through as many questions as possible, some of the moderators will rely on using index cards to take written questions so we can get through as many of them as possible, prioritize avoiding redundancy. Moderators may open up the microphones later on as time permits. When you do offer up a question, please at least offer your name and where you're from. It just helps us take things in perspective. I want to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, too many to list by name, but whose names you'll see prominently displayed throughout. The steering committee has not sought sponsorship for NEWEEP for this conference from entities who have the most direct link to specific wind siting outcomes. That choice is mostly symbolic, underscoring that this effort is not industry-driven and where really goes in line with where the dollars come from is seen by many, perhaps very reasonably so, as an indicator of bias. Ideally, NEWEEP would be fully supported exclusively through government, foundation, or nonprofit sources. In this economy, that's simply not realistic. We have to reach out broadly for support to make these things happen. We're not claiming any purity here. The fact is that many of our conference sponsors work largely or even exclusively for the wind industry, and one of the utilities is even developing a wind farm. The mix of sponsors is necessary, their support is appreciated, and really it underscores one of the challenges to funding this effort or education and research efforts in the absence of funding perhaps from other than industry. How do we do that and maintain the credibility of the information and have it perceived as credible? So you've heard about our hosts, National Renewable Energy Lab, a little bit about myself and Sustainable Energy Advantage. I wanted to acknowledge, first of all, that we do work for both industry and government. We're not subject matter experts on public acceptance science. Rather, we're industry analysts, market, policy, financial analysts. We spend a lot of our time observing, analyzing trends, seeing patterns, trying to draw insight. Among many other things, we track and analyze the status and production of wind generation throughout the region. And in the process of doing this, we've observed some things. That decision makers are challenged to pull facts out of the noise of advocacy, and that assertions and communication strategies are more often dictating whether a project gets cited or not than good information, accurate information. In this environment, I don't think we're yielding what an objective observer, if there could ever be such a thing, would consider appropriate results. One reason I got into this is to help rationalize this frustrating, inefficient process, to help projects succeed where they make sense and not be proposed where they don't. So, on that note, I'm going to turn over the floor to my colleague Jason Gifford. His bio is in the folders. One of his roles for Sustainable Energy Advantage is analyzing, tracking energy development in the region. He'll start off today's program by providing us with a common foundation, an overview of wind development facts on the ground, where wind has been developed, where it's being proposed, some of the key characteristics of that development. Give us something to build on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Gifford. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to provide some context for today's discussion. And as Bob described, what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is summarize the nearly 250 wind energy projects in operation and in development throughout our region in order to give you a both visual and mental picture of what we're talking about today, not just in your own neighborhood and community, but around the region. As Bob's already described, we are analysts at heart, and so this is my perspective from our research. I wanted to share with you some of what we have found over the last 13 years as we watch renewable energy projects under development, and this information we work with communities and government and others as they try to understand the market as well. In the spirit of a picture being worth 1,000 words, this is my last slide with any text on it, nearly. So hoping to, again, provide a visual summary of the activity in our region and really the state of the market. So in the next several slides, what we'll look at is activity by state, by project type, size, development status. So we'll get to see the expected or proposed rollout of wind energy throughout New England. And then I'm going to conclude with just a few brief comments about key factors influencing that activity in the region. I'm going to talk about small projects, some of which may be considered community wind projects. I'm going to talk about larger projects as well. And I want you to please keep in mind that there are different modes or models of development, some of which, perhaps the larger projects driven primarily by economics. Others may have one of a variety of community objectives in mind, encouraging it forward. So, and we'll look at these data among each of the 6 New England states. So we're going to start in Massachusetts and go around the horn, if you will. And before we do that, a few comments on the map itself. You'll see in the upper right there's a legend which shows us that color coding is for different project types: wind farm, community scale, customer sited, small wind, which we've defined as less than 100 kW, and red for offshore projects. Most of these are self-explanatory. Generally speaking, the community scale is less than 10 megawatts, but that's a category which has some flexibility in its definition, and the wind farms represent larger projects. One very important thing about the map is that it resides at the New England Wind Forum. The link is at the bottom of this screen and on all of the subsequent screens. So you can go here. You can do your own filters for state, for project type, and on the live version, roll over each of the projects and see a summary. So just from this screen, you could sample any number of projects here and learn who's working on them and size and a short description about them. This information was last updated during the first quarter of 2011, so it's pretty close. But since then, some projects may have advanced or stalled, or new projects been added. This is publicly available information as of its last update. So the 2 final comments here. The size of the dot also is relative to the size of the project. So in some cases, it gives you a sampling of that as well. And then for Massachusetts in particular, another thing you can see as you look at this slide and the subsequent 5 is that, not surprisingly, the distribution of projects tracks the wind resource. So in this particular case, it's coastal and the higher elevations of central and western Massachusetts. So now I'm going to do the same thing in a slightly faster fashion for each of the remaining 5 states. So in Maine, again, all of our setup is the same. The first thing we recognize is that there are some larger projects under consideration in Maine, and that the projects are grouped, again, in the higher elevations. And then in addition, in some of the fairly open and flatter lands in northern Maine. And as other of today's panels will no doubt discuss, transmission will be a focal point here, but not only in Maine and in other regions or in other areas of the region that are thinking about how to get proposed generation from these northern areas to the load in southern New England. Moving down to Connecticut, we find a little less activity than in the rest of the region, but in fairness, this is consistent with the lesser wind resource. There is a 100 kilowatt project in operation now, and there are 2 multi-megawatt projects under development, one of which received its approval from the Connecticut Siting Council within the last few days. Here's a brief visual on project operations and proposals in New Hampshire. And in just a few moments, I'll show several graphics that start to separate operating and planned projects by state and by size in a moment. In Vermont, wind projects generally follow the Green Mountains from north to south, and in addition, there are a few other projects proposed for the northeastern part of the state. 2 Vermont projects, one in the northeast and one in the northwest, received important incremental approvals within the last few days, one with a series of conditions, which will provide for additional dialogue in that context. And then finally in Rhode Island, there are several operating as well as planned projects. Rhode Island, while not represented here, is also importantly deeply engaged in the discussion regarding substantial offshore wind development, both in state waters and in adjacent federal waters. So while I don't have Block Island and the surrounding projects on this map, that information is included in the summary graphics, which I'm going to talk about next. So the next 5 slides look much like this one. And let me just walk you through briefly what we're looking at, and then, much like the last ones, it'll be easier to do the next several slides after this. The source of the data is from our work tracking wind energy and other renewable energy projects across the region, and it's the same data that populates the project maps on the New England Wind Forum website that we just looked at on the previous several slides. So the category we're looking at right now is land-based wind greater than 10 megawatts, and we'll look at the projects smaller than 10 megawatts in just a moment. Here we are summarizing the megawatts on the vertical axis by state on the horizontal axis, with the color coding separating project status all the way from feasibility up to construction and operation. So we see that Maine represents well over half of the approximately 2,500 megawatts of proposed and operating wind that are summarized in the slide. This is the same set of data, land-based wind greater than 10 megawatts, but now on the vertical axis we've got the number of projects, and we've separated them into 4 size categories: 10 to 25 megawatts, 26 to 50, and so on, with each state having its own color. So we can extract a couple things from this quickly. First, northern Maine dominates in the larger project categories. You can see Maine and New Hampshire represented in the 101 plus megawatt category. And that the tendency toward smaller projects in New England reveals itself in the column which is all the way to your left. Now moving on to, again, land-based wind, but less than 10 megawatts. So this slide is set up the same way as the first one. We're talking about megawatts again. And here we can see that while each project may be quite small, many of them are substantially less than 10 megawatts, the total quantity of this distributed generation, if you will, adds to over 180 megawatts in Massachusetts alone. So it's another very important type of energy development in the region, which we're here to talk more about today. This is the land-based, same land-based group, less than 10 megawatts, now again separated by different size categories. The less than or equal to 250 kW, and then the subsequent 250 kW to 1 megawatt, generally representing your behind-the-meter, probably net metering projects. The next two categories, 1 to 3 megawatts and 3 to 10, in some cases may be behind the meter, but in many cases still probably born out of the recently proposed net metering policies, particularly in Massachusetts. Just want to offer one slide on offshore wind development. Again, the vertical axis in megawatts, and we have 3 states represented here. In Massachusetts, the green, as you would expect, represents the Cape Wind project. The other 50 megawatts there in Massachusetts, a project proximate to Nantucket. In Rhode Island, represents several projects, both in state and adjacent federal waters. And Maine is here because, inevitably it'll play an important role. There's research and development, task force, substantial discussions going on in Maine. We don't yet know from a proposed permanent megawatt standpoint what to expect there. I just want to offer a couple of concluding thoughts on the last several slides of data here. A recent request for information from a regional organization yielded responses from more than 4,700 megawatts of renewable energy in general, over 90% of which was from wind. So that's approximately 4,300 megawatts of wind, a little less than that. And the summary that I just provided you accounts for a little over 4,400 megawatts. So it's a pretty good representation of what is known and out there in the region. Some of what I showed you today is operating or under contract as well. There are multiple perspectives. This is sort of the ISO New England view of the current market, and we have a speaker later today who will really do this justice and go into more detail. But I just wanted to also give you an opportunity to see in blue and green together what's in the proposed interconnection queue, what additional wind energy resources might be added to get to 20% energy equivalent in our region. The new resources in this particular scenario are both on and offshore, and this is one of many, many possible futures. But again, just a brief a different perspective. So I'd like to close with just an overview of some of the key factors influencing wind development activity in New England. And while two projects are rarely the same, they'd all need to address these issues. And in addition to the matters of public acceptance, which are the leading reason we're here today, projects must understand their cost structure, including transmission, and achieve revenue certainty in order to attract financing. And since the opportunity for renewable energy is generally created by and then subsequently limited by policy, you're not surprised to see a column of policy factors here, namely renewable portfolio standards, long-term contract initiatives, and a variety of both federal and state incentives. So with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time and attention, and please come introduce yourself later today if you have any questions, and I look forward to speaking with many of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jason. Just a couple of words on mechanics, and then we have a few minutes for a couple of questions. I forgot to mention earlier, we do have some exhibitors out in the hallway. Please take time to take a look at their booths during the breaks. When we get to lunch, we have box lunches today. We have a fairly packed schedule, so we'll ask you to go out, grab your boxes, take the break that you need, check your messages, but then come on back in here and get settled for our lunch speaker. You'll notice there should be index cards spread on all of your tables. We'll have more if you run out. As we go through the day, it would be good as you come up with questions, jot them down so that you're ready at the end, and we'll have people come and collect them so that we can get through the questions. As you have them, bring them up so the moderator can already start prioritizing and eliminating duplicates and things of that sort. We'll have a couple of minutes today. I just want to make one comment about Jason's great presentation there. That ISO New England picture had a certain distribution of wind projects that looked a little bit different from the maps, the state-by-state maps. An important detail there is that the smaller projects, usually those under 20 megawatts, don't have to go through the ISO interconnection queue. They interconnect with the local distribution utilities. So one shouldn't draw a conclusion from the ISO picture that where the ISO is focusing is the only place where wind is being developed. Now, be happy to take questions for any of us, and we have about a minute for questions. We want to get into the meat of the story, so there are microphones open. We can cut to the chase there if anybody has any questions about the content of this morning. Otherwise, we can welcome up our next panel. So there are microphones in the aisles here. I think I see a couple of people making their way. If you could just, introduce yourself, please.
My name's Kathy Sherman. I'm just a public citizen. My question or concern is that if you look at resource maps that, for instance, the National Renewable Energy Lab has provided from True Wind, I believe, in terms of what land is available and what that has a good wind resource. Massachusetts only has like about 1/10,000th of what's listed for the United States, and the other New England states don't have very much, except where you've seen projects in Maine is the only state, I believe, that's in the top 20. So how do we do that without a lot of sacrifice to pre-existing land use?
You want to start that one? Maybe I'll follow up. Lonnie, are these mics on?
Yeah. I think that gets to one of the hearts of the questions here. Clearly there is, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, we develop the maps, but we do not make any indication about what areas are developable or not, because that's not something that we can do from the national perspective. And so there certainly is viable resource in the New England context, and it becomes a very large and difficult question in regards to the financing for the projects, grid integration, where you can connect it, how you can connect it, other land use requirements for the property. The fact that people are developing the sites, private organizations. We live in America, which means that if a private entity feels that they have an economically viable project or even an economically unviable project, but they still want to invest the money and do it, they have the right to do so going through the appropriate permitting. And so we're not in a position where we can talk about really specific projects or get into all of the details about why someone would want to put a project in Massachusetts as compared to Maine. I think throughout the day we'll get a lot of flavor of that dialogue. But needless to say, if people are interested in developing the projects there and are willing to put the money up, then the project is a viable project and the resource is good enough to warrant that development. And then it's a question of whether the community and the organization want to have that project developed.
Okay, I'm going to add just a couple things there, and while I will invite Warren Leon and the next panel to start making their way to the podium, I have couple of points to add there. First of all, where the wind is and where load is aren't necessarily the same place. To get those vast windy areas in the Midwest, there are no people there. So how do you connect these things? Well, you either need to build the generation where the load is, or you need to build a lot of transmission. And I've heard a recent speaker say the only thing harder than getting wind sited is getting transmission sited. So there's always something. And the other big thing to focus on is the difference in cost. While wind may cost less because it's windier in other parts of the country, you're also competing against less expensive resources. Here in New England, our energy costs are higher, wind costs a little bit more, but the differential is often similar. So on that note, I will turn the podium over to Warren Leon from Clean Energy Group and the Clean Energy States Alliance to take